So CSS styles, right? So again, CSS lets you control things like font family, font style, colors, border, spacing. So in CSS, you can specify font dash family to specify things like Arial, Helvetica, sans serif. If you don't know what these are, read up a little bit about fonts, and you will understand what serif and sans serif fonts are, and Arial and Helvetica. If you've used programs like Microsoft Office, you know what these fonts are. But go ahead and read up a bit on fonts to find out a bit more. You can specify the font size, you can specify the color of the text, the border around the text, the padding, the spacing of around the block that contains this text, and margin. So these are just a small subset, but probably the most commonly used CSS styles for formatting HTML elements. So for example here, if I say apply a color blue on H1, a color red on a div, and a color green on P, and I want to give a dot yellow, a dot means it's a class within HTML. I'll give an example of that in a second. And here's a color purple applied to a div with a specific name called ID1. And here's another one that is going to match any HTML element with the ID ID2. It's not specific to a div. The previous one is specifically a div named ID1, has to be color purple. Here, any HTML element with ID ID2 has a white color. The text is colored white, padding is 5 pixels. There's a background color blue, and it has a 1 pixel solid red. So if we apply styles like this, let's see what it would look like if we built a HTML page. So if we put in a h1 title, div, paragraph, this is what it would look like. The title would be blue, the div would be red, and the paragraphs would be green. And then if we applied a class to those HTML tags, like a div and a p, what's going to happen is, because we're applying the yellow class to it, that div and that p paragraph are going to be colored yellow. Now I'm going to have a div ID equal to ID1. So this is going to match that third rule, which is the color purple. Obviously, this is not the color purple, but the idea is that if you had a div with an ID ID1, it would be colored purple. And finally, if you had a div ID ID2, that would look like this. You would have a blue background color, the text in white, padding is which is the internal spacing in that block is 5 pixel, and a border of 1 pixel solid red, right? So this is how HTML and CSS interacts with each other. You have HTML elements that are shown on the page, and you can apply CSS styles using the default styles or classes or IDs and apply them to various elements on the page. One more thing about CSS and HTML colors is really CSS and HTML use the hexadecimal color model. You might have seen this in other places as well. This is the most common color model in computers for RGB colors, which is red, green, and blue. So these are the foundational, 3 components of a color. So the way hexadecimal colors are represented is there are 6 characters. You can see some examples here. At the very top is red, which is FF0000. So the first 2 characters represent the red component, the second 2 the green, the last 2 or the third to the blue component, and each value is 0 to 255 or 0 to FF. And red, as you can see in this example, is FF00FF, can be shortened as F00. Hex color model is a very huge topic, and I would highly recommend, if you're interested in this, in representing colors in websites, or in fact in other software. If you use software like Photoshop, you will come across the hexadecimal color model as well. Highly recommend that you read up about this online. There's many resources. So here's an example of a CSS style sheet. Right? Again, this may look a little bit overwhelming, but just remember that this is, each of these 3 blocks of 3 or 4 lines is a style applied to a specific sort of element in the HTML page. So the first 3 lines are basically the CSS reset. Basically, it sets margin and padding and border to 0 for all these elements. And then the second set of 3 lines is basically applying a background image and a background color to the main body, and so on and so forth. So each of these CSS lines basically allow you to control one part of the web page that you are building. Again, if this seems a bit overwhelming, just take it one step at a time. Try to read one block at a time. Try to figure out what it means. But if you play with HTML and CSS, you'll very soon be building CSS styles like this yourself. So building websites, right? So with this basic knowledge of HTML and CSS you have so far, you will be able to design complete websites, even complicated websites like the one on the right, which is a fairly very popular Chinese news website, ntdtv.com. So you basically build it. You can use title tags, add images using the image tag, links using ahref, colors using CSS. You can actually use slideshow components using HTML and CSS and JavaScript, and we'll be talking about JavaScript soon, not in the next class, but very soon. And typically the way this works is that a designer designs the website in Photoshop or similar software, and then the designer or developer converts this design into HTML and CSS, and the developer will also code the backend, which is the server side, which has some additional functionality in addition to the front end user interface that's built in HTML and CSS. Just to conclude on this class, there's some HTML CSS libraries. HTML5 and CSS3 are the latest standards. Basic HTML is fine. You don't really extend HTML. But CSS, there's plenty of libraries out there that extend some of the common functionality in CSS. So there's 960.js and other grid systems that will use CSS to align elements properly, reset CSS, normalize CSS to reset CSS so that your website looks the same across different web browsers. And some CSS libraries are very advanced. They let you control every element on your web page, for example, Bootstrap. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about Bootstrap because it's so popular. It was developed at Twitter to build consistent full page styling for your entire web page. It was open sourced in 2011, about 6 years ago, and it's probably the most popular front-end CSS framework right now. So it has default styles for everything: headings, div, span, font, margin, padding, form elements, drop-down menus. So the idea is, even if you're not a designer, you will be able to build a good-looking website using the Bootstrap CSS library. So you simply import the Bootstrap library, and you can build buttons that look like this on the right. You simply apply a class from the Bootstrap library, and you're up and running. You have a very good-looking website in no time, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the design elements because Bootstrap gives that to you. And on top of Bootstrap, you will find what are known as themes. So if you build a Bootstrap website, you can apply multiple themes to it. So with one website, you can actually have different styles and colors. So the example on the right, are some themes from bootswatch.com. And so there's multiple themes for Bootstrap. And actually, as you build websites, you will come across the concept of themes. WordPress has its own set of themes, which is that you can apply different styles for different websites. So that's basically what a theme is. And you can use the same Bootstrap elements in your web page and just add the CSS for that theme, and it will be applied. And again, the concept of themes is not unique to Bootstrap. You will actually find that in other websites as well when you are building other websites. So that brings us to the end of the HTML and CSS part of this course. And I know that might be a lot to take in. If you need to see this class again, feel free to do so. Once, again, this is just meant to give you a brief introduction to HTML and CSS for building websites. And we will learn about more programming concepts in the next class.